So this composition, I'm really trying to highlight the edge of this main flower on the right has probably the brightest yellow petals. The light is coming in from the right there, so the composition is really focusing in on that component. Now, when I'm just establishing the composition here in this panel, you can see I'm being really quite loose for a start. I'm really just mapping out the overall large shapes, that main flower, and then the receding other flowers into the back of the scene. Today I'm using French ultramarine blue, alizarin claret, cad red, Indian yellow red shade, cad yellow, cad lemon, titanium unbleached, some titanium white, and transparent red oxide. So yeah, I'm really now just really filling in the darks. I'm just trying to establish those darks so that I've got something to play with later on. I am, it's Alla Prima, so I've got to be careful about how thick these darks are. I'm trying to use a little bit of liquid and fast drying solvent that is going to enable me to paint over the top. You can see me mixing up there. It's just mixing a darker green now to apply those other dark patches. I'm really just thinking in shapes, and it's very tempting when you see a still life that is anything close up, really, that you still imagine all of the elements of the composition to be flat, like you do in a photo, like you see in a photo. However, they are not flat. There is distance between the front layer and the back of the flower arrangement, albeit it's only 10 centimeters or 20 centimeters between the two. But there's still, if you can think that there's some atmospheric perspective there's some depth, let's call it depth there, that you can absolutely establish in your work to give a feel and sense of depth to the work. At the moment, I think as painters start or artists start to see a lot of florals where that depth actually isn't very considered. It's just like, here's all the flowers, here's all the stems, and they're all the same saturation of color, and they're all and here's all the yellow petals, and here's all the green stems. But it's actually, if you look very, very carefully, that's actually not the case. There's multiple shades of yellows, and there's multiple shades of greens, there's multiple shades of darks, there's background, there's receding shapes with lost edges into that background. So it's not really until I get to this point here that I'm starting to go, well, okay, I need to get at least the base of the background in to get a sense of how this is all going to come together. I was a little bit lost at this stage, actually. Still considering this depth and foreground component, but I'm jumping between different elements of the work. That's just how I work. I don't, others work the same. Others, focus on particular bits here and there, background to foreground, etc. But I tend to jump around, usually in a darks to lights, except when I need to establish a value of the light first, like my lightest light, my brightest yellow, for example, in this sense. So I've placed some of those in. These won't be my final petals, if you like, but they form the basis of how to see the work as it develops, and that comparison between your lightest light and your darkest dark. That's what gives it depth, and that's what gives you the ability to create this 3D illusion on a 2D surface. That's the joys of oil paint, especially. It can really enable you to do that with great effect, and I love that process. And that you've got to trust the process, because at this stage, I still feel lost and angry sometimes at how this develops, because it's you want it to be finished. You have this imaginative kind of end goal. Here's my lightest yellow. So I've mixed up some cab lemon yellow and cad yellow and a little bit of white, and that just lifts it to sort of the lightest value I can really get with my limited palette. So there now becomes the comparison of what I can do for the rest of the work as it fades to the darker areas. At some point in the not so distant future, I start to not be totally happy with this composition. You can see here my 4 flowers are all kind of painting, or all kind of pointing out of the composition. It's kind of, yes, there's the main element, the main in the bottom right hand side, the main petal, if you like, or the main flower, but there's something missing that doesn't resolve with me. So you will see, not in the not so, where I've just gone, okay, I've got to actually do something about this, and I decide to make a serious compositional change to the picture. I'm also now just sort of adding my lightest greens, although some of these greens will be maybe not as much as that at the moment. You know, they're thicker paint. I like working in larger brushes than what I should. Larger brushes really force you to think in, obviously, larger blocks of colour, how to use the brush differently so that it can create the impression of the petals, but it doesn't necessarily need to be every line and every edge and every shape to be exact. That's not how my brain works, at least. I know others like to paint like that, but that's not how my brain works. I see a lot of my artworks in this impressionist style as I start the work, so it's just an extension of that sort of visualization process. Sometimes I connect it really to my days as a musician. I was a professional musician for 10 years, or even longer, really, my first career. And quite often you are not writing music, so I'm not being creative with a blank canvas and writing, but I am being, as a musician, you need to be very expressive. Your artistic input is expressive shape, of breath, of sound, of rhythm, of all of those elements that can bring emotion out into the work. And that's the same approach that I use here. Every brushstroke is connecting with an expression. So here's my chance at fixing this composition. And I think it actually really works by doing this. So I've decided to add another flower. So you can see now it's not a large flower, it's a small flower. But it just breaks up that sort of void in the middle of the work and creates that. Also, the odd number I think works as well. Just 5 flowers instead of 4 works, but it actually pulls the eye back into the work that I prefer that shape and texture. So yeah, I do absolutely. I'm listening to music. A lot of artists do that, but I'm also finding expression in the music while I'm painting, and I'm reflecting on that more and more as time goes by as the active artist, that it's it's a subconscious part of how I paint is this expressive style, and there is a real connection there that I've often struggled to put into words, but it is definitely a thing with how I create, and my creative process is an expressive process. So you can see that I'm revisiting that background, and the background is a mix of like titanium buff, like unbleached titanium, plus a little bit of the greens and a little bit of the yellows, and I've lost the edges of those petals at the rear of the floral piece to give that sense of depth. See, I'm breaking those edges. There's soft edges, very, very soft, that just are blurred into the back. There's no edges, there's just blur. And then in some petals that are more forefront, there's a nice clean edge to the brushstroke. So that gives it that sense of depth, but also the sense of texture. When you're looking at this up close, you're getting a nice, you go, okay, there's actually a chunk of paint on that petal. The center of the sunflowers, I'm using transparent oxide red and a little bit of like an Indian yellow red shade, which is Michael Harding. It tends to lean towards a cooler burnt color that softens the oxide down, and it has a little green in it, so it does really nicely connect in with the other elements of the work. It's interesting when I do work through this process that I do have to walk away and not touch it. It's very easy to start to overwork these expressive pieces because, and if you're going to do that, I tend to actually scrape it out and just start the component as well. I worked a lot with Todd Wishen, fantastic Queensland artist, travels around Australia doing plein air work. And Todd, in his classes several years ago, he'd walk up to my easel and just scrape out parts and go do that, like try that again. And at the time, I was just like shocked that here's this artist that is brutalizing my work. But actually, it's a really solid lesson in, just don't hang on to anything too seriously in painting, especially oil painting. It's such a flexible medium that you can really just play with paint and not get into too much strife. If you do get into too much strife, you can easily scrape it out and just try it again. And you've just got to be brave with that and not take the brushwork and mark making too seriously. It's so what I'm doing here is I want presence, but I don't want man-made edges to be too obvious. So I'm breaking some of that edge. You can see me there with the brighter yellow, just breaking that circular edge there, so it just doesn't look too man-made, if you like. It's tricking the eye. Not everything needs to be obvious in these works. And you can see, I connect to that flower that's pointing in the opposite direction because it's so broken up that it's, I love it. It's just this sort of distance and playfulness to the petals that disappear that really make it work. So we're kind of coming into the last parts of this piece now. I'm still working a little bit on the darks of the center of the flowers, and I do come in and just rework some of the background base and get that coming along.